y'all, I'm Erin Jean Ward, broadcasting live from the Good News and Gratitude podcast from United Thank Offering. If you're new here, we explore the gratitude and good news we find in Scripture, the world around us, the wisdom of our amazing guests, and through cultivating our own gratitude practices. We're choosing prayer over perfection as we try to remember the good news of hope and joy that surround us and sustain us. Let's dive in. Hey y'all, I'm excited to be back after a short change in schedule due to illness a few weeks ago. Thankfully, we are still moving through the season of Lent together, with weeks left to go. In the spirit of transparency that I've tried to offer on this podcast, I'd like to share a story from a recent Sunday. I went to a Christian education class focused on creation care at my church, and the spiritual impetus behind why creation care is important, which I deeply appreciated. We were asked what parts of climate change and climate crisis are most concerning to us. I said, in front of a very large group of people, that I'm very concerned climate change is affecting and will continue to negatively affect the lives of our unhoused neighbors. I shared a short story about back when I lived in Austin the first time. In seminary, we had the chance during our 1-month January term to volunteer at a ministry in the city, and I chose Trinity Center, which is a day shelter for unhoused neighbors within St. David's Episcopal Church downtown. While I was volunteering there, I got to know more unhoused neighbors, and I'd always ask, "What brought you to Austin?" Especially since some of them had accents that weren't very Texan. I was intrigued to learn that many unhoused people connect via group chats and other digital communities for the unhoused, where they share resources, share tips, and specifically, they often share places where they have found that it is easier to be unhoused than others. And so I learned that Austin, Texas was a place that many unhoused people would move to because they had heard it was easier to live there without a home versus other places. And I was told that most importantly, it never got too cold. And while Texas has always had pretty hot summers, to say the least, there were resources in place to help unhoused people in the summer. Water stations, and of course, day shelters like the Trinity Center, which gave them food, water, and refuge during the hottest part of the day. There were also cold night shelters, but they weren't needed very often. They were needed within the hardest and most intense part of the winter. But other than that, things were pretty okay. They told me. I explained in the Christian formation class that things have changed regarding that. A few years ago, Texas had a devastating ice storm. Even people who had homes died inside them, either because they froze to death or because they didn't have power. So they tried to create a fire inside the home to warm them, which spread and caused damage and fatalities. I was living in Austin again at the time of the ice storm, and I hearkened back to my time at the Trinity Center and remembered how the unhoused neighbors I met there would never have experienced an ice storm in Austin. That's when I realized how climate change is affecting the most vulnerable among us. Now, that's all fine and good, but the story about what happened on Sunday is not over. After sharing about my experiences in much shorter form during that formation class, I went to worship and then I drove home. As I was driving, I got to a red light and saw what looked to be an unhoused neighbor on the side of the road with a sign. I felt that lurch of compassion. That feeling when you're pretty sure you're staring Jesus in the face, but for some reason you end up frozen instead of as actionable as you presented yourself in formation class. I pondered for a minute before I realized it was pretty obvious what I was supposed to do. I waited until it was safe, slid over into the right lane beside him, rolled down my window, and gave him some cash. I apologized. It wasn't more. I told him he had a sweet dog. He smiled broadly at me and thanked me. I did a U-E and got right back into the middle lane where I first saw him. Even after proclaiming how much unhoused neighbors matter to me, in the clever disguise of a formation class, when I was faced with the actual need I claimed to care about, it took me longer than it took to raise my hand to share all my thoughts about what really matters to the Christian faith. Yes, I did end up giving him cash, but the lurch of compassion and the pause in response is not lost on me. I hope I have always been clear that I do not think of myself as a moral exemplar, and instead, like much more of a way that you might learn about how to be Christ like via negativa, as they say. But if you thought maybe I thought I'm great at this, I hope this story frees you from that belief, because I'm not even remotely good at this. I am just trying to figure it out like all the rest of us. And I think that is the perfect place to introduce our scripture for today. Our reading is from the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." In today's gospel from John, we witness what I think is a similar lurch of compassion and someone responding to it. Jesus comes to Bethany to be with his very close friends, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, and the disciples. At the dinner, Mary takes what we should envision as the most expensive and highly sought after perfume you could imagine. Like, think of a perfume sold at a store you wouldn't even walk into for fear they might charge you for something because you, left a fingerprint on an item that costs more than your mortgage, right? That's how expensive this nard feels to them. And Mary takes this costly perfume and pours it onto the feet of Jesus, then washing his feet with her hair. I think this is probably what everyone in their gut knew was the right thing to do: to worship Jesus, to honor him while he is alive, knowing he will soon be taken into death. She stops saving the nice stuff for a nice occasion because she knows this is really the only occasion that matters: the occasion of saying goodbye to her dear friend. She knows there is no better purpose for this nard than to show Jesus her love through worshiping him and helping prepare him for his upcoming burial. And yet, Judas felt that lurch of compassion. He witnessed what he knew he was supposed to do, but he couldn't meet the moment with the right spirit. He struggled. Ironically, he deflects, citing the necessity to care for the poor, saying Mary has been wasteful, as they could have sold the perfume. Now, the gospel is clear in saying Judas had no intention of giving those riches to the poor, but my connection to Judas in this moment is still prominent. When I feel the lurch of compassion, I, too, tend to come up with lots of things I could do with my money that don't add up to worshiping God through loving the person in front of me who bears the image of God. And that's exactly what Mary was doing. She was worshiping God by loving the person in front of her, who not only bore the image of God, but who was God incarnate. She proclaims there's actually no better way to steward our riches than to place them quite literally at the feet of Jesus. But I struggle with choosing the option that isn't worship, too. I'd be lying if I didn't say that in my very own middle lane pause, I thought about how I was struggling financially myself, how I hadn't figured out how I would pay April rent, how other people who have much more money than me, they would have more to spare. So maybe I could skip today and someone else could give. The problem, of course, is that worshiping God through loving the image of God that stands in front of me is not something to be done later by someone else. No, as a Christian, when I'm faced with that opportunity, because it is given by God to me, I need to receive that as an invitation to worship. Though I struggled for a minute in that middle lane, I did give a very small amount of cash to the image of God I saw that day. And you know what? I drove the rest of the way home feeling positively buoyant. Not because I was proud of myself, but because I got to help someone, even just a little bit. And I know how much people helping me lightens my load and brightens my heart. And in retrospect, I think I drove the rest of the way feeling so bright and buoyant because I had encountered God. I had been invited to worship, and this time not in the sanctuary. I had met Jesus along the way. My worship left the tabernacle and met me on the road. And all of this, everything from the invitation to worship, to the lurch of compassion, to the experience of worship, all of it is knit into how we understand gratitude. Because I can tell you now that I'm grateful for all of it. And I'm grateful to have been called into worship, which is literally a practice of thanking God for the abundance of God's love for us, for God's care for us, and for the breath God continues to place into our lungs. Next time you're invited to worship, don't be too hard on yourself if you feel that lurch of compassion, followed by a million reasons why you should leave this job to someone else. You're just like Judas, and you're just like me, and you're just like most of us. But instead of letting the lurch of compassion draw you away from what your soul knows is the most beautiful work of our lives, remember this is actually calling you into the most beautiful work of our lives, which is worshiping God and seeing the face of God in one another. There is no such thing as a bottle of nard or a couple of bucks more precious than loving God and loving one another. The Good News and Gratitude podcast is a gift from United Thank Offering. We'd love for you to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and share this with a friend. Don't forget to rate the show too. Make sure to follow UTO on Facebook and Instagram @United Thank Offering, and follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky at Erin Jean Ward. Our show is produced by Ozma Lee, for whom we give great thanks. And of course, our deepest thanks to you, our listeners. I pray this week that you are invited into worship in whatever ways God might reveal God's self, whether it is in the face of another or in the breath coursing through your lungs. Bless y'all.